Good morning. It is February 10th, 2021. We are reconvening with law enforcement across the state of Texas and also the African American Lawyers section of the State Bar of Texas. I want to say something before we continue, and I believe we were talking about defunding of law enforcement. This collaboration has brought together not only professional organizations, law enforcement, the legal community, from practitioners. It's brought a variety of Texans together to truly be transparent and discuss issues that do matter and are most likely not understood, not conveyed across different lines of groups. And with these efforts, I have seen a huge growth and improvement amongst people in general that may not have normally and necessarily communicated back and forth to the point where solutions, resolution, and ideas can be discussed in a reasonable and rational way, whether they are agreed upon in full or not. This has shown that people do have the ability to come together when it comes to polarizing issues, and life and death matters nonetheless can be thoroughly looked at, discussed, and no one has, in my perspective, gone away to where they have not spoken offline or come back the following weeks. And I just want this to be something not only in discussion sake, but now applied as we are headed and already in our legislative session, the 87th legislative session in the state of Texas. It's a huge accomplishment of all the persons here. And I just pray that our efforts can be also taken to others who will make the decisions, write legislation, vote on legislation, and look to improve the state of Texas. So with that, we would go back to our discussion of defunding. It is a very interesting term because I think that, again, follows what has just been stated, and the fact that it's probably not clearly defined, but it's used and thrown around so much that people have been incited and excited about something that maybe it should properly be looked at, addressed, and then also defined in a way that it can be used positively for, I think, means that some may not appreciate, but the general populace would certainly want. And we have stated from the African American Lawyers section that Black community has never said we don't want to have safe streets and homes to live in and go to. And I believe that follows all the rest of the ethnicities and citizenry throughout the state and the country. With that, Kevin Lawrence, TMPA Executive Director, I know that you have been on the forefront in Texas about the issue and just how that can affect and adversely affect law enforcement's abilities. And you went as far to exclaim that in Austin in a unique way on a billboard and some other things. But give us some perspective from the law enforcement side. And I know that there are others such as Clay Taylor from DPSOA, and I believe Doug Griffin from Houston, and Travis Hammond as well.
Well, you know, the whole defund thing in Austin started out with the Austin Justice Coalition lobbying heavily the Austin City Council to basically gut the Austin Police Department. And it went through a series of hearings and so on and so forth. And the term defund was actually coined in that process. It wasn't in law enforcement's response to it. It was in the lobbying effort to defund law enforcement. As a matter of fact, and we talked about this back then, you know, the Austin Justice Coalition, Black Lives Matter, they had one of their objectives was a world without police. And so getting rid of law enforcement as we know it was one of the objectives. And obviously, you know, we think that's a bad idea. And I think the vast majority of Texans and Americans also think, they understand we have to have law enforcement. Somebody has to enforce the rules. So it kind of morphed. The billboards was a reaction to what we felt like was a very bad series of decisions made by the Austin City Council.
Let me ask you this, Kip. What involvement, or were you invited to balance out the thoughts and the lobbying of one side of this issue prior to a vote?
None. No, and to be fair, we do not represent the Austin Police Association. So whether or not Ken Cassidy and the APA board were ever invited, I remember Ken being interviewed on news stations. I do not remember him ever being invited to testify in front of the city council.
Okay.
So, and they ultimately voted and put in place a plan to trim fully 1/3 of the Austin Police Department budget over the next few years. They then backed off of that, and after they had cut the first 21 or 22 million, they then decided, no, that's going to be the sum total, and it really isn't cutting. We're simply redirecting those funds to other services and so on and so forth. But in the process, their police academy was shut down. They canceled 2 classes worth of people that had already been told, you're hired, you've got a job. Folks that had quit their jobs in other cities and other states and moved to Austin, all of a sudden didn't have a job waiting for them. So a lot of bad things happened as a result. So I think that with regards to Austin, and of course we had a little bit of this go on in Dallas, but the whole defund thing was it was a mantra, it was a battle cry that has kind of morphed and changed as we've gone through the last 6 months or so.
And as we talk about legislation that is before the legislature at present, and Nikki, who is moving our legislative group forward for our section of the state bar, and then we're also fortunate to have our chair, who is a member of municipal council in the state of Texas. I don't believe, if correct me if I'm wrong, Nikki, that there's any thoughts of trying to defund in that, or we should say reallocate funds in a way that would not go to law enforcement, especially when we have brought up the fact that there's a lack of funding with respect to training.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Steve. I think in all of our conversations, and I don't want to speak because there are some out there that do want to defund, but I do know that has not technically been our platform. And I think the conversation gets kind of confused when you really stop and consider what exactly does defunding mean. When I hear individuals talk about defunding, I kind of think back or think towards the episode that kind of happened in Killeen. What was that, last month, with the pastor, where they were talking about where they had the mental health officer come out. I believe they said that they had the pastor that got killed out in Killeen, right, by the police officer, or they had the shooting. That's still under investigation, so we're not sure everything that's happening. But one of the things that they had talked about was that the day before, when they had called, there was a mental health resource officer that came out. And then when they called the next time, or the next day, they said there weren't any available. And so that's an example that's kind of been used, where they're saying they want to reallocate those funds to make sure that they have enough of those type of officers on staff. And so it's not necessarily taking the funds away, it's reallocating to different sections or different facets of the police department, maybe some to training, so that you can beat that up, but that's usually not communicated. And so I guess my question would be along those lines is, how do you determine how are the police budgets broken up, or how do you determine where those resources go, right? And then where are the resources coming from? Are they?
When they're reallocating these funds, though, they're not necessarily reallocating them to other trained officers. They may be reallocating them to different civilian positions or things like that, and that's to try to take place of what the officers may be responding to, which can place them in a very dangerous situation.
Now, Travis, and I appreciate that. We've also had Fred on here from the Dallas-Fort Worth area speak to being a more traditional or less burdened officer, and not necessarily disagreeing. And again, I don't want to speak for him, but again, having these specific services handled by others outside of being law enforcement in particular. So that, as you say, Travis, understood. Nonetheless, there could be a fact of saying we want to be more traditional in what our roles are within the community, and allow others to pick up those duties mentioned that Nikki was talking about, and not necessarily putting that burden continuously on law enforcement.
Yeah.
And as Nikki was saying, the devil's always in the details. The decisions are made on a political subdivision by political subdivision basis. The budgeting is handled by the city council in Houston. It's handled by the commissioner's court in Travis County. It's handled by the school board in Pflugerville ISD. So the elected body, the governing body, they set the budgets. The sheriff, the chief can ask for whatever, but it's the governing body that actually makes those decisions. Whether or not a department head can then move stuff around within that budget is problematic, because they still have to answer to that same governing body, and they still have to go back every year to get those funds. So I think when you talk about what does defunding actually mean, it depends on who's using the term at that moment. It is literally a case by case situation, because like Travis said, if you're redirecting funds within the police department, that is management telling the police chief, we want you to do X instead of Y. But moving the funds from the police department to some other city department, some other city section, then means the police department now has to trim services, trim personnel, trim something somewhere. And it may not equate to, okay, we're going to trim this particular function right here, because let's say we're moving funds to train up civilian personnel to respond to mental health crises. Does that mean law enforcement will no longer respond to anybody that's in a mental health crisis? Because I got to tell you, if there's a gun involved, if there's an assault involved, you still need your law enforcement personnel on that scene in addition to the other. So simply moving the funds doesn't accomplish what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's what I would say, because it would be interesting to see where, if you do reallocate, then who takes up that responsibility, or how do you determine who is the right agency? Because think about CPS cases. They're so overloaded, and sometimes they, when you think about that kind of administrative agency and the services that they have, especially coming out, I've done ad litem work. I've worked with children that are in those situations, and it's already rough just for that administrative agency that is tasked solely with dealing with that. So just think about if you create a whole new agency to start dealing with some of these mental health calls or other calls, and then you have to think about everything that police are called out for, right? Is there a different agency that would handle a call with a homeless person that's outside underneath the bridge that's having some difficulties? So you have to start thinking about that. But mental health, I think, is the big one. And I guess my question is there an opportunity for us to maybe look at some resources? Or because I think at the end of the day, a lot of, and I'm speaking from what I've seen or just what I've experienced, it seems that some of these calls, when you are dealing with welfare checks, have some tinge of the mental health aspect to it. And so you do see police officers that are doing a lot more. And I know that, I've in my community, they're like, don't call the police. If you don't want to get shot, then don't call them. And I think that's a horrible way to think. But I mean, that is kind of what people are saying now, don't call. And so if there is a gun involved, or there's some kind of violence, they don't want to call.
But that's part of the problem. We got to change that mentality. There's nobody out there going out. We're not looking to go shoot somebody. But if somebody's got a knife or a weapon or something like that, then of course you got to do your job. But people got to get out of this mindset. Oh, if we call them, they're going to come kill us. That's ignorance on that person's part. We got to change that mentality.
It's not just saying you have to get out of that mentality. There's a certain segment of our population that is preaching that mentality, that is telling folks the police are out to get you, the police are out to get you. And
it's just not true.
It's not true. And I think that's where the conversation has to start.
So let me ask this, and I know Kevin, surely speculative, and I'm gonna, well, let me see if I can do this. In Austin, I was gonna ask Rudy, but he's not available right now. Why would, or why hasn't there been the connect between local APD here and the community? Clearly, we have arrived at this point and been very consistent that there needs to be the community interaction. Because again, as Doug said 4 months ago, if the only contacts you have is when it's bad, you're going to naturally gravitate to when police and law enforcement arrive, it's not good. And so I think that's where you get your scenarios. You have to be able to sit down when it's not a bad situation and really get the understanding and build the relationship at that point. Because when it goes bad, you're going to more react to what you know, not what may be there, in that particular circumstance. Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I didn't have a comment. I was just clearing my throat.
I'm sorry.
I'll put it on mute.
This is something we've talked about. There has to be a willingness of all parties to actually have those conversations to get that done. And in all honesty, I think inertia is as strong a force in this as anything else. We just haven't done it before, and we're waiting for somebody else to start the ball rolling. And we were contacted a few weeks ago by the Benneret Foundation, which is a multi-faith ministerial alliance out of the Houston area, and they want to work with law enforcement on a statewide basis. And I think there's a great opportunity there, but I don't know that a statewide basis is where it happens. Like you said, Steve, it has to happen at the local level. And as I told you years ago, when I started reaching out to the local NAACP saying, hey, let's have a conversation, I couldn't even get lunch. I couldn't even get an agreement to just sit down and have a conversation. And I think that's what we have to overcome, the old attitudes, the historical.
Us versus you, we versus they situation.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and when it has happened, it's happened between the community organizers, the community leaders, and the police administration. And I think what really needs to happen is we need to have the line level officers, the officers that are out working the streets on a daily basis, meeting with the actual citizens that they serve on a daily basis. And you guys have heard me, I've lectured different departments. They talk about their civilian police academies, their citizens police academies, and how popular they are. Well, guess what? Guess where they always hold those classes? They hold them at the police station. You know what? There's certain folks in our communities that don't want to go to the police station for any reason. The same reason they're not calling, like Nikki's talking about. They just don't feel comfortable at the police station. Let's have our civilian police academies in the communities. Let's have them at the local community center, at the local Baptist church, or at the Episcopal church. Let's have them out there in the communities where people feel more comfortable. And there's not that us versus them mentality. It's more of a community effort. And I think we need to rethink that strategy.
We've done that quite a bit here in Houston. I've spoken at a couple of churches, Joe, Ray. We've all been out there and we speak all the time. The problem is you're going to get agitators in there that they have one goal, and that's to rile everybody up. And at some point you'll get tired of listening to the BS when they, they're just wrong. They're wrong on what they believe is fact is not fact. When we throw facts out, you throw numbers and everything out there, and they're like, that's not true. So-and-so did this. And sometimes you just can't overcome that. There's sometimes when you just have to, okay, and walk out. But
and I think, go ahead, Doug, I'm sorry.
No, I will talk to anybody. Y'all know that. Y'all know I'm very passionate about my job, my career, and I will talk to anybody at any time about it at length until you're blue in the face. And I'm very proud of the job that I've done in this department. And I'm very proud of our department. But sometimes it feels like you can never win that battle, because no matter what you do, they're going to look at you as being a racist, a killer. Just there's all kinds of names been attached to any time we go out and speak, and we have to get past that. We have to get people to understand that's our job is not to go out and kill people. When you have how many millions of contacts every year, and we have 1,000 shootings, that's actually pretty darn good when you talk about the number of contacts police have every year. So we have to get out of that little mindset.
And I think, and I think that it's important that, like Kevin said, where you have your community leaders and people that are kind of taking out I'm trying to find the right word, the media effect is what I call it, where it's the shock value. Because I know here in Fort Worth, especially when they were doing, the protests and stuff on the bridge, we had the Tatiana Jefferson thing going on, and just some other situations. I do think that at that point in time, if you have a core set of community leaders that actually have influence, and those police officers that are working together immediately, like you talked about, that after it takes place, yep. Transparency, have those discussions, have those conversations, so that you know what's going on. Because what happens is if you wait too long and you have that kind of mentality coming in, then you'll start to hear those naysayers. My family is split. So I'm not, totally transparent. I do have family members that do not like the police, and they get mad at me when I say certain things, but I get where they're coming from because I've seen it in certain situations. But I've also seen it from the lawyer aspect, to where if you have the facts, it kind of makes you turn your head, right? And so the longer you've been practicing, the more that you allow some of your values, and not just your values, but just what you know from common sense, then you're not so quick to pass judgment. Everybody's not going to be there. But I do think that that's a point where we have to start. And that's why these conversations, I think, are great, because it gives us an opportunity to go back. And that's something that both me and Steve and Rudy, we've been doing with our bar associations, and just because we have to start being kind of that voice, because you have people that don't understand. They don't know, and they're not educated. And when I say not educated, I'm not calling them dumb, but they don't want to know.
Right.
Because they believe what they want to believe. It doesn't matter. When you give facts in a case, I can go talk to them blue in the face with an employment law case with my clients, like, it's not really discrimination, but all they see is discrimination. Even though they were coming to work late, even though they had a bad performance evaluation. No, I got fired because of this. And so there's some people are just not going to get it. And so you just have to kind of have those people that are willing to be transparent. I think if we had more transparency, or we had a better understanding from a education standpoint on how these processes work, or like with defunding, where is the money really coming from? If we're hollering for a defund, is the money actually coming from the government? Is it coming from localities? So that people understand what they're really asking for. Because I got into a debate with someone on defunding, and I'm like, what does that mean? And the only thing that they could say, well, we're going to take the money and put it here. But isn't that just reallocating? Or restructuring? It's not really a true defund. Nobody wants to not have the police. I know I don't.
To have these conversations, we really have to be willing, all of us, to challenge our own deeply held beliefs. Okay.
Agreed.
Doug's very proud of his job. He's very proud of his profession. He's very proud of his fellow officers, as am I, as is Clay. But we have to be willing to step back and go, well, now, wait a minute. Are there things we're doing wrong? Are there things that law enforcement needs to do better? We have to be willing to have that conversation. At the same time, we have to be willing to challenge some of the premises that are out there. For example, and Nikki, I'm going to challenge you on this one.
Okay.
When something does go wrong, and by the way, we can debate all day long. Doug brought up the stats. He said, there's 70 million contacts between police and citizens every year across this country, and about 1,000 people die during those contacts. Not all the shootings, but 1,000 people die in police custody or in police interactions. That's a very, very, very small percentage. And if we start looking at them on a case-by-case basis, the vast majority of them, they're all tragic, but the vast majority of them are very clearly justified. It's not that the officers did anything wrong. In those cases where the officers did not get it right, we cannot jump to the conclusion that it's because they're bad officers, that they're bad people. And here's where I challenge you, Nikki. The San Francisco 49ers.
Oh my God.
Were they a good football team this year?
Do what now? Repeat that.
Were they a good football team this year?
They were good with what we had.
Okay, let's talk about the Cowboys. Were the Cowboys a good football team this year?
Of course not.
Sorry, were the The Texans are good football. No, they were bad football teams. Does that mean they all fielded bad football players?
No,
No.
that's true. No.
You're not in the NFL if you're a bad football player. Okay. There's a lot of other things that came into play there. And this conversation, this national disinformation campaign jumps from, if something bad happened, it must be because it was a bad cop involved, and ignores all the other factors in between: the policy failures, the training failures, the staffing failures, the funding failures, the leadership failure. There's a lot of other things that come into play there. There's how much of it was the fault of the individual that wound up dying in that circumstance. How much of it is the fault of, any number. So jumping from point A to point Z and then changing public policy based upon that assumption
Right.
is where the problem comes in. We have to be willing to talk about everything in between.
Well, and we also have to be willing to take the time, because things are not going to be undone in a while, right? And so you have an immediate cry or immediate, I want this done. We've been working through that with some of the stuff with the different bills that are out there, the George Floyd Act. Some of those, just reading through them and just kind of making sure that they logically make sense, right? Are they actually solving the underlying problem? And I think that is something where I made a promise to myself, and I know Steve did, as well as Rudy and others, to really educate ourselves so that when we are out there talking to our community, or we are out there telling our bar associations that we communicate with in the African American communities, to reach out on a local basis, to do these seminars and these forums on what to do when you're encountered by a police officer, that we are informed and we understand all of the pieces that go, into the training, the responses, just the situation that they're in, so that when you are asking for change, it can actually happen. So it's a two-part thing. And I think that that's where maybe what needs to happen is, I know we have all of these different political parts to it, but I think that it needs to be, just like there's a media campaign to put out, this police brutality is bad, there needs to be a media campaign to say, what do we do to fix it? Like, just what solutions? Let's not keep dwelling on this is bad or this is bad, and just kind of come up with some solutions. And that's where we struggle, because we want to make sure that we're reaching those. And you have some that are going to sensationalize it. They're making money off of it. I'm just going to be honest. They're making money off some of this stuff.
No doubt.
But then you have others that have truly been impacted. And, when you stop and look at it, the family members that are so confused because they're getting advice, legal advice this way. They're being told to think this way by the public, but then they know some of the facts internally, right, that involve around that situation as well. So you think about all of the different parties, and it's like, every time I think about these situations, I'm like, education, transparency. And my whole thing has always been transparency and accountability. When you're wrong, though, you got to say I was wrong, right? If people don't understand what's going on with an investigation or how we even got to this point, putting that information out there and making it accessible so that we can do research and we can look at it is key. I shouldn't have to do public information requests and wait a whole 6 or 7 months and then have to pay all of this money just to get stuff that should already be accessible. I think it would help when you're trying to educate people. And so those are some of the barriers that I see to helping people feel more comfortable about this, because it always seems like people are hiding something or they don't want to share that information. And so they must be doing something wrong.
And you also have to look at, because I'll be the first one to tell you that, yeah, we have some officers that have issues, but most of our stuff starts at the top. When you start looking around the state at the leadership and how their policies drive what the officers do, that's where our biggest issue is. We're line officers. We don't get to dictate what the policy is going to be. If you let line officers dictate what the policies would be, you probably have some better policies around the state, to be quite honest with you.
So how do you address that, though? How do we deal with that at the top? Is that through elections? Is that through working with your city council? Like, how do you address it?
And it's different in every city. I mean, in Houston, we have a police chief that's appointed by the mayor.
Okay.
So he's going to do whatever he wants to do. The only person he answers to is the mayor. He ain't going to listen to us. If he wants a policy that says everybody's going to wear fuzzy pink slippers, guess what he can do next week? Sign of a pen, everybody's wearing fuzzy pink slippers. It's just, there's got to be some checks and balances. And I don't know if that's through TCOL or what, but we got to have some kind of balance in there to help with the policy issues that, as soon as a chief goes in, he wants to make all these sweeping changes, and then everybody's pissed off, morale goes down, and now we've got nothing.
And
We-
as we've talked about many times, there's 1,400 municipal law enforcement agencies in the state, plus 254 sheriff's offices, plus I don't know 1,000 how many constables' offices, and they've all got their own different ways of doing things. And I do believe we'd be better served if we did have a set of best practices, a set of model policies that come down from the state of Texas that are and that need to be developed without a doubt with the input of line level officers, the input of commanders, and the input of our civilians, of our citizens. All that needs to be put together in a set of best practices, a set of model policies for all departments to adopt at the very least as their framework for their policy manuals. There are organizations out there that do the accreditation process. There's a number of them. We could possibly work through that dynamic as it currently sits. The problem is they're almost always for-profit organizations. So
Right.
you have to.
There goes more of your budget.
Right. So.
And to follow up on what Doug was saying, the person that's affected by all these rule changes is the line officer, not necessarily the individual that's setting up in the top floor of the admin building. And from my experience, some of the best laid plans in that top floor have been disasters when they were implemented out on the street.
Well, I'll give you a prime example. Our body camera policy. I've been studying body cameras for years. I did my master's thesis on the realities of body cameras. I taught every officer on our department the body camera class. I love the body camera. I think it's one of the best things that ever happened to our profession because it does get our full side of the story, not just the BS. But then they turn around, the department turns around and uses that. And so every little infraction they hit you with now. If it's on body camera, no matter how small, you're getting dinged for it. And that's a morale killer. It really is. If the complaint says this officer berated me, yelled at me, slapped me, and then they go back and watch body camera, none of that happened. But he forgot to search the trunk of that car on that arrest. He's going to get dinged for that.
More importantly, he didn't have his hat on.
Yeah, something stupid like that. And then they get dinged and they don't understand why is morale so low. Morale's not because you're hammering them for the silliest of things. Oh, I forgot to wear my seatbelt when I crossed the roadway over here. I mean, it's the little things that get you. And it's very hard for us to try to keep the membership engaged and to do their job when that's the issue.
Which is
Our
that
chief
leadership thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like some internal policies need to
That is
be
lack of
adjusted.
leadership.
Our lieutenants, our captains, our assistant chiefs, and our chief, none of them wear body cameras. None of them. Only the sergeants and patrol officers wear them. And if you forget to turn it on because of whatever reason, you just forget, you can get anywhere from a written reprimand to 15 days off. And that's just a human reaction. I tried to tell them, I said, do you remember to lock your car every day when you get out? No, it's a human reaction. You just can't remember every freaking time. Things are going to happen. Your mind may be elsewhere and you just forget to hit that button. And yet we're getting guys, if you use force, it's anywhere from 3 days off to termination.
So Doug, my question is this an appropriate opportunity with T. Cole in the situation? Again, uniformity has to come into play because, again, you don't want the benevolent sheriff to go up against the sheriff of Nottingham, who may be as crooked as the day is long. You need to have the law enforcement officers recognize what is across the state, correct? And I'm not going to say that this wouldn't be a possibility, but even, our group may be able to lend, some legal support from a nonprofit perspective to do some promulgation to ensure consistency. I would hope that the community would say, look, this group of attorneys certainly would look for balance when it comes to uniformity across the state. To sit back and say there's, you can do nothing. And again, it comes from my sports background. You have to do something. You have to, even if it's taking a chance, it seems crazy. It may work better than where we are and just sitting at status quo and just having the world pass us by and we're not making any improvements.
Well, that's why instead of reimagining police and how that is, let's reimagine TCOL and what they could do with the proper funding and policies in place that would help all officers across the state.
Right. Because I think a lot, and Nikki, you can give your view. I think that there's so much inconsistency. And I think Black Americans and others may say, look, you don't treat us the same way that you treat others. And I just don't believe that you can just say, well, it's this sheriff versus that sheriff. It can be an interpretation, yes, but if there's some uniformity, I think there would be reasonable expectations that could say, we know what the law says and what the rules are. It's just not made up for one group versus the next because there is no uniformity.
No, I completely agree. And I'm a strong proponent, as Kevin stated, of having some model policies across the different agencies, because I do think it provides that consistency, a little bit of accountability, because it's here, it's written, and this is what should be happening in some cases, with the understanding that now, we know there are different areas, rural areas, some urban, and so there's going to be some additional policies that would have to be added, according to where you are at. But I do think having some standard policies would help with that accountability or transparency and consistency. So I'm a strong proponent of that. I think that we just almost have to.
Well, I think so. We have to have caution in that, is because every community is different, and you have to have the leadway to adjust your policies based on the community in which you're serving.
Well, Travis, I would say this: the country lawyer and the city lawyer are very different in scope. Nonetheless, we have uniformity at the state bar.
But you want to know what's funny, Steve? Just to add to that, there's even a difference in how attorneys are treated depending on where they're practicing. You ever been small town? That's what they call it. You know what I mean? So you even see it there, honestly.
But there's still uniformity in our practice.
It's supposed to be.
No one is going to say, well, the local rules, and there are local rules that have that flexibility. Nonetheless,
that's true.
As holders of our bar cards, we know that there's some standardization for each attorney. But then again, as Travis mentioned, and rightfully so, there's going to be flexibility in local rules and how those are purported. But that basis and foundation is consistent.
And it also gives you the opportunity to point to why you feel like you're being treated differently. Because there's some local rules that are something that we can point to that says this is how this was supposed to happen, and it didn't. And so you're acting, outside of the norm. Why is that happening? So I do agree with that.
Yeah, and I think Travis's point is very well made. As a matter of fact, when Steve said earlier, we need to have uniformity. That again, this is a matter of semantics. We need to have the framework. We need to have consistency with regard to what the policies should include. But at the local level, there has to be some level of autonomy to address local issues, to address the different dynamics that are involved. Certainly, it's going to be different for a statewide agency like DPS that's in all 254 counties. So there's going to be some differences in policy, but there are some basic fundamentals that need to be consistent across the board.
Correct. And I think, again, time is going to have to be taken to have town hall meetings and community gatherings, not just in law enforcement structures, to provide for the community to have a different perspective. I think I've gained a different perspective, not just because my work and employment was in the Criminal Justice Committee as a staffer, but because of the commitment that we've made each Wednesday for the last several months that allows us to share information and hear perspectives and gather understanding about all these topics under the umbrella of law enforcement, interaction with citizens, legal precepts, and legislation that's being considered. But that takes time, and that's going to take a commitment to showing up and being in the communities.
And that takes a certain amount of sociology too. There has to be some interaction that involves it. You know what? And again, I hate to keep picking on Nikki, but I was reading something yesterday, some Department of Justice reports or whatever, that talked about women and how, you know, how often women are arrested as opposed to men, or how often women are identified as the perpetrators of crimes as opposed to men. And I didn't realize this. I was actually taken aback by it. Between 1980 and 2018, the percentage of women who are arrested has gone up significantly in this country. In 1980, women made up only 16% of all the people arrested for what we call index crimes under the UCR statistics. Whereas in 2018, that number was up to 27%. So my question is, why? What has changed? Isn't that a discussion that's worth having? So when we start talking about the statistic, when we start talking about feeling like something is going on in our communities with regard to gender or race or ethnicity, we should have conversations about why those feelings are. Why do the numbers reflect what they reflect, and what all is factoring into that?
Right. And what are they being arrested for? But again, these discussions need to come out from under, you know, the structures, as Doug said, and be moved to a more neutral, a more conducive community spot. And that's where I think we have to go to the legislators and staff, current staff now, and say, listen, you're not going to get the buy-in you want unless you find a neutral place. Interestingly enough, because of the pandemic, Zoom makes it a very neutral environment of being able to come together wherever you are. We're all in one place, but it's not advantage law enforcement or advantage lawyer or advantage Black or advantage male. We're all here, and we've given a good faith effort to explain, discuss, and to understand things we didn't know.
But you want to know what's sad though, Steve? And I'm just going to put it out there. If anybody's watching this, they might get mad at me. You have a lot of people that won't even do that. Like, they don't want any conversations. And I've struggled with that, because when me and the NAACP and the other lawyers got together in Fort Worth, and we just took the community leaders and not necessarily the people in the community groups. So that way we could take out the noise and just really just talk and have conversations. They were not happy. We had some people that wouldn't even sign on to our letter that we sent to the city council because they didn't want to talk to the police. They did not want to talk to city council. And that's where I think that we have a gap that we got to fix, because you do have to have these conversations.
And that's going to be on us, because we've decided to do something. And it's never easy to do something when you have polarizing factions within a structure, when you're looking for solutions. And you always know, you always have the naysayer. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And then, or I don't like them. I don't like them. I don't like them.
It's not going to work.
That's great, but you haven't
do anything.
Right. You haven't linked yourself to problem solving, to finding a solution. All the men and women that have been on these calls have committed to at least discussing and looking at a way to come up with some type of compromise solution, rationale that moves us from where we are to where we can be and where we need to be. And maybe you have to keep hammering with the people you have until the rest of the group says, you know what, they're serious about doing this. You know, there could be people that look back in June, July and said, oh, they're only going to meet a couple times. You know, they'll do a little ceremonial deal and they'll move on. And then they'll just wait for the legislature to act in January through June. Well, that's not the case. We've garnered and gathered momentum. We've put a lot of things on the table, and we've addressed things that may not be comfortable. And when I say that, to lead into next week's discussion, I had mentioned to Kevin, and again, I know you didn't get a chance to clearly and thoroughly explain, but you said from an organization and representing your members, at present do not support the George Floyd Act. I haven't delved into a huge discussion about that. However, it's something that I think, given the platform of neutrality, openness, you're not running for any elected position, at least not at this time, you can give some explanation and some clarification and some background to that next Wednesday. Nonetheless, people in the general populace can see that and say, well, what has he done to this point? And just say, here he goes, he's a naysayer. That's not necessarily the case. We've talked offline. However, I think it's imperative that you share and expound upon your comments, like I said, as soon as next week, because I want to be mindful of the time we have now. But these things all take time, effort, and some focus on being a positive in your outcome and being positive in moving things forward for everyone, not just the law enforcement, not just for this ethnicity, but for the citizens of the state.
And we'll be happy to do that. It's not that we're opposed to any particular piece of legislation. We are opposed to bad public policy based upon false premises. And
right.
You're right.
And you need the opportunity to explain that so that people understand. Because again, if you just read an article, we can say Kevin Lawrence bad. And again, I know some
people would agree with that.
The general populace doesn't, and maybe I can make a different determination, but it's not about that discussion per se. And we've known each other 20 plus years, so that's a great way to start and getting things out. But
by the way, this is a conversation I had with a reporter this last week where we talked about this. One of the problems is that our attention span as a country, as a society, seems to have gotten shorter and shorter. And I hope that can be correct. I doubt that evolution has occurred just over 2 generations, that we've lost the ability to pay attention to one another, that we've lost the ability to actually have reasonable dialogue. Sometimes it feels like we have, but I have to believe we still have that ability. We're just not willing to put the effort into it. And I think that's your point, Steve, is that we need to make the effort. We need to put our own emotions aside and our own preconceptions and be willing to have a conversation where we're not only willing to explain ourselves, we're willing to challenge our own belief systems, our own assumptions. The great Paul Simon line where he says, "I have come to doubt all that I once held as true." We need to challenge ourselves about stuff when we, in these conversations.
Right. And I agree. And you and I, Kevin, had to agree to collaborate before we could go into those challenging opportunities. And and again, I look at them as opportunities, because once we vet through things, we have usually found that with the support of Clay and Travis and Doug and Nikki and Rudy, that we get perspectives within this group that are I don't know if they're 360 degrees, but they're a heck of a lot more of a complete view than what we had prior.
Steve, when you called me last spring, and I was in San Antonio, my wife and I were in San Antonio doing something personal, and my phone rang. Do you remember how I answered the phone? You remember the first words out of my mouth?
I do not.
Because I looked and I saw your phone number, and because I hadn't talked to you at that point. I don't think I'd talked to you in several years. And I answered the phone and I said, "Well, this can't be good."
We all answer our phone that way when he calls him.
Well, as it turns out, that phone call was a very good thing. And that's what I'm talking about. We have to be willing to challenge because I had to assume if Steve Foster was involved, it wasn't a good thing. And it turns out I was wrong. So,
Kevin, you've been wrong about that for more than just that instance. We've passed some very solid legislation for the state of Texas, and you've allowed me to actually
work. But you have to admit, I've been right a good part of the time too.
Well, I tell you, I've learned that it's just difference between small wins and big wins. And my wins and those positives come from those championship win levels, not the small losses. Okay. You don't have to be undefeated to be a champion. Just got to win the championship. So, no, you're right. We
Tom
do.
Brady.
You know, I didn't want to go there, but you know, it is what it is. But what we've done, Kevin, is brought people like Rudy and Doug and Clay and Travis and Nikki into the opportunity to find resolve. And so you've already agreed, and I want to say this before we exit today, you've agreed to come along with us in the town hall meetings that the African American lawyer section are looking to have across the state. This one you can see unification and you can get the explanation from folks, and hopefully the local folks like Doug in Houston and Fred in Dallas Fort Worth and others, and even Clay, if we're in Austin and we're talking about DPS, that we can show a more unified front. And that is the consistent picture that the community and the law enforcement community is picking up on, that there is a marked change and difference in how the approach is in resolving issues that have been tenuous.
By the way, and before I forget about it, I've got another conversation this afternoon with the Minaret Foundation, and they're talking about wanting to do the very same thing. Go have meetings at the town hall kind of meetings. Can I volunteer the African American lawyer section to participate?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay, you guys?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think the town hall, not only just the one that we are working on right now, putting together. Thank you for bringing that up, Steve, and definitely we'll give out the information when it gets there. Maybe what we need to also do though is be that leader with our local organizations and have them start, if we need this to happen on a local level, then get like the L. Clifford Davis or J.L. Turner to partner with the police associations and start doing these town halls for the community so they can see where we do agree, we have a united front, and where we don't agree, we can have these kind of discussions. And that is, I think, going to be the first step in changing that perception. So I do think that that's a task that we should take on and actually plan some seminars and some sessions.
Yeah, outside of a piece of legislation.
I agree.
Legislators, or because that could be great and that could go into effect. It doesn't change, as we said, the local aspect of community and the policing and law enforcement and those beliefs or disbeliefs and distrust that would happen on a local level. You still need those interfaces and touches, I think, to be effective.
Agreed. And I think that we can pull them all in. I've met with some pastoral groups that are starting to form some, and the first thing that we've said is, y'all, we got to start having these conversations. Because you got to start meeting. You got to be willing to meet. And we can't be on a pulpit. You can't be in the park saying, it's us against, you got to start having those meetings.
And between HPOU and DPSOA and the Dallas Police Association and TMPA and FOP and Harris County Deputies Organization, what, Doug, we represent 55,000 of all the cops in Texas.
Yep.
Not everybody.
I'm sure we can get them to the table.
Clay said everybody.
Exactly. And they can see that we've taken the time prior. They want to go to all the Facebook posts and see that we've taken the time, and all we're asking them to do is no more than we've already done and committed to do ourselves. So in their local places and where they live.
Well, don't minimize it. And I don't mean to be disagreeable.
Well, I mean, to start there.
Let's not, some of these conversations are going to be difficult to have. We're going to have to be willing to be uncomfortable in the conversation, at least getting the process started.
Correct.
Absolutely. But I mean, as we all know, but that's why you got to have the conversation.
Right.
You got to start from there as well. And I think the biggest thing that I've seen between these conversations and what's resulted from that is getting the right information, the true information out there. And I think that's been something that's been remarkable and great to hear, from all different sides and other different viewpoints regarding that. Because, I just literally, and my apologies, the audience was probably wondering how did they jump in and jump out. I had to give a presentation regarding, it's a virtual Capitol Day, another partner organization, another group. But one of the things that I highlighted, and strangely enough, TPPF followed me right over there. We both talked about that, is that It's got to be data driven. If we talk about things that are data driven and it's not just pure conjecture and bloviating right there, it changes the whole trajectory of a conversation. Because then after that crazy concept, you have the same facts to talk about these issues. And I think a lot of the issues, a lot of things that happen is that there's not an education. I think one of the things I continually see in the comment section on our videos is, hey, how come the public doesn't know about this? How do we educate the public on this? What do we do about the public? Great ideas. It's a great point. And if you know exactly how to do so, please let us know about it. Because I know they've been introducing legislation. I know when I was on the board of TYLA, Texas Young Lawyers Association, we had Strength and Unity, and we had a whole program rolled out about how to interact with law enforcement at stops because people didn't know. I was at the event. I was supposed to speak for 30 minutes to about 150 teachers across the state of Texas. That ended up being an almost 2-hour conversation because we were all saying, okay, wait a minute, if we don't know as adults, how are these kids going to learn that? How are we going to go and approach that? What are we about these issues? People just don't know. And the problem is that I don't think that we've engaged well enough, even though as best we've tried, to be able to put that in the education system, the schooling system to help educate that. There's so much other things they have to learn with the TEKS, talks, everything else with that as well. But these are, I hate to say it, but I think given our times, some of the most important ideas, concepts, concerns people need to know. They need to understand law enforcement, how it works better. They need to understand what their rights are. They understand how they interact with one another. They need to create that boundary, that opportunity for trust and conversations with folks to have those things happen. It's not an easy conversation, like Kevin said, but it's a necessary conversation, and it gets easier. Crazy concept. More and more times you talk about it, and more times you have true understanding and dialogue on these things. And this is where I'm just proud of Nikki and Steve and what they've done, and working on there and the whole African Warrior section of the state bar to speaking on these issues because it's made a difference. I've seen it firsthand make a difference in the conversations that we've had, both with y'all and with other folks, other stakeholders in the community right there. So.
Well, we've now run over time again, guys.
Well,
we start late, but then we continue late too.
Well, everybody stay warm this week and happy Valentine's Day.
Oh man, I got some snowballs coming.
No, I will not be outside.
I just want to apologize to Steve and Rudy for having to eat with me and Kevin and the rest of us clowns that were there the other night. And I really appreciate y'all coming. And I apologize because I was feeling like crap that night. I got that COVID shot that morning and it did not do me right. So I want to apologize. I wasn't my usual boisterous self.
Oh, we're glad you're feeling better.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
For us up here in North Texas, they just put out an email stating that our shop's going to be ready with chains to put on our vehicles this weekend. So fun stuff, right?
Cold.
Wow. I'm telling you,
Apocalypse.
Why I live so far south. I hate the cold.
that 10 degrees weather is going to be awful cold Sunday.
Yeah, I'm gonna be in the house.
And you know, Travis, my middle one has a soccer match, and I'm trying to figure out how they're just going to roll up the kids.
It'll probably get canceled.
Keys and everything else.
Weather.
Oh man.
You know, I want to say this. It's amazing how cold it gets when you're out directing traffic or working an accident scene or something. When it's 10 degrees, like Travis is going to be out on the streets at a soccer. You can leave a soccer game. You can't leave that traffic scene. It's just so. Travis, y'all please be careful up there.
Yes, we're praying for you.
Also work that wreck from inside the patrol car too.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you. We will be back next Wednesday. And like we said, get the context and comments about the legislation being passed and continuing to discuss the issues and how community involvement and putting together a plan of community activities can certainly go a long way in distributing information, dispelling myths, and hopefully disbanding the groups of naysayers and bomb throwers that aren't attributing to solutions. So we'll see y'all next week. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.